thinking on the way up here that we have great-great-grandchildren of Thomas Smyth, great-great-great-grandchildren of James Adger, and great-great-great-great-great everything else if you want to go all the way down. And I think Erskine's going to spend a lot of time talking about those two people, but it's just wonderful that all these years later we have a family reunion, and so many of us are here. And so, I don't know, Erskine is a professor emeritus at Columbia Theological Seminary. He's written lots of books about Calvinism, Presbyterians, Adgers, and Smyths sprinkled throughout. He knows more about this church, more about James Adger, more about Thomas Smyth, probably than anybody alive, and he's not finished yet. So, Dr. Clarke, please come and see us.
It's great to be here with this distinguished family and have so much fun last night, hearing who was connected to whom and how, and that's a great mystery in many ways with this group. I'm amazed at how many of you are here. I had expected a much smaller group, but it's terrific to see all of you here. I think I want to begin by thanking the Legree Street Smyths for last night. It was just a terrific occasion, and I know all who were there really appreciate your hospitality. I was struck by the way in which the different families were relating, and it reminded me of a letter written about a visit to the Adger family that I want to read to you this morning. I want to read just a short excerpt from it, because you might think about your own family experience and what has brought you back here, and how over the generations certain parts of a culture that is a family culture might have continued. This is in my last book, By the Rivers of Water, a 19th Century Atlantic Odyssey. And it is a letter written by a remarkable man, John Leighton Wilson, who was from up the Black River area of South Carolina. And actually, when I came in, I saw this, I don't know what to call it, monument to Henry. He ended up marrying a Henry, though he proposed to Margaret Adger, and she turned him down. And she wrote, some of you might be Wilsons rather than whatever you are. But anyway, he was quite taken with the Adger family when he was here. He and John Bailey Adger had been classmates at Union College in New York. And so he was here for a little while in Charleston. And he wrote his sister this: there is more domestic happiness and harmony in this family than I've ever seen in any other. Love appears to be the ruling principle and peace the consequence. So I think that's just a wonderful statement. Now, I know that over the generations, peace can fracture with families and so on, but to think about the way in which there was something about that family in those days that attracted his admiration. And he was himself quite a remarkable man, and came from a very loving family, a very close family, and yet he saw that in the Adger family. Well, when I got the invitation to come and to speak to you, I started thinking about what might be interesting for a family reunion. I had talked to a group of you some years earlier and I remember that, and I was thinking about what might be interesting for gathering of people from all kinds of backgrounds, different interests, and so on. And so I thought at first I might plunge into one of Thomas Smyth's volumes and try to probe that and explore that. And I told my wife Nan, I said, I'm thinking about discussing Smyth's lectures on apostolic succession. And she frowned. Then I said, well, what about his work on presbytery and prelacy? And she frowned again. And then I thought, well, how about ecclesiastical republicanism? And she really grimaced then and said, you know, you shouldn't talk politics in family reunion. But those, the politics that he was talking about really were church politics. Those of you who are backsliders and have become Episcopalians, he didn't like bishops. And so that's what this was about, these volumes. I had said before, when I met with the group before, Thomas Smyth's big 10 volumes, that I thought that I was the only person from the foundations of the earth that had ever read all 10 of them. And I suspect, is anyone here? I thought so.
I've seen them.
I'm safe. That's one claim to fame. What I want to do this morning, what I thought might be interesting for you as a family with different backgrounds, is to focus on the 19th century and to take little vignettes out of the history of the Adgers and the Smyths and highlight some things that you might want to explore yourself at some point. I know that some of you will know a lot more than I know about some of the items that I'm going to mention. Some of the incidences or some aspect of the Adger Smyth family that you might have explored at some depth. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go for a while, maybe 30 minutes, and then we'll have a chance to have questions and comments and just see where you are, what you want to talk about. So, one of the interesting places that I think might fascinate some of you is Thomas Smyth's father, Samuel Smyth, and his participation in the Irish Rebellion of 1798. And especially after last night, it's hard for me to imagine a Smyth involved in a rebellion, but and being put in jail for it by the British. But he was, and it would be fascinating to explore his role in that and to learn a little bit about that Irish rebellion. It was one of those early rebellions where both Protestants and Catholics in Ireland joined together to resist the British rule. And so that would be an interesting area to explore. And Thomas Smyth himself continued to have resentment of British oppression of Ireland, both what we think today of as Northern Ireland, Ulster, but all of Ireland. So that's one area that I wondered about. Another area that occurred to me thinking about that Irish rebellion is to think about the attempted slave rebellion here in Charleston in the 1820s. And there's this great controversy about the Denmark-Vesey or Denmark-Vesey attempted insurrection. But when I was working on, years ago, on this little book, Wrestling Jacob. I came here and I was going through the records of Second Church, and I discovered, to my astonishment, that Denmark Vesey was a member here. And he was a free black in Charleston who was executed along with 35 others for an attempted insurrection. And the controversy that surrounds that insurrection is the degree to which there really was a plot going on, and or the degree to which white hysteria dominated the decisions that were made about that. And I've been in conversation with a professor at Johns Hopkins, Michael Johnson, who is working on this attempted insurrection. And he suggested that one of the Adger slaves, a man named Aberdeen, most likely knew Vesey. Well, for sure knew him, but may have somehow been connected with that. So to explore the way in which this congregation, and particularly the Adger family, might have had some connection with this very important attempted slave insurrection is a fascinating question, I think. Another area that I think some of you have already been exploring in your own studies is the relationship between James Adger and Alexander Brown, and who was James Adger's sponsor, as it were, in the cotton business. And Alexander Brown, the Brown Company, became one of the leading international importers, exporters of cotton, extraordinarily influential. Baltimore, New York bankers, and the relationship between the Brown family and the Adger family was close and important. There was a recent book on the Cotton Kingdom, not the Cotton Kingdom, the Cotton Empire, that explores the international connections of these cotton merchants, and there is attention to James Adger as a part of that cotton empire, with all of the links, especially to British manufacturers. So that's something that I'm sure that some of you have already explored, and I understand that there's some Adger who is still connected with the Brown family in Baltimore or New York, but it is not only connected with, the Brown family is not only connected with cotton and import and export, but also with railroads, just as you can imagine, with banking at that period of time, and deeply involved in a wide variety of economic activities. One fascinating area is Thomas Smyth's relationship or conflict with the great black abolitionist Frederick Douglass. Smyth was accused of slandering Douglass while Smyth was visiting in Great Britain. And Douglass sued him for libel. And there was this intricate dance between friends of Smyth's in the Irish and Scottish churches and the abolitionists about how to settle this suit. And it was eventually settled. But it is a fascinating thing. Here is this family from Charleston, this Adger and Smyth family from Charleston being related in important ways to two key 19th century figures connected with the struggle of African Americans against the oppression of slavery, with Denmark Vesey and with Frederick Douglass. Different ways, but certainly important stories. I think some of you heard a friend of mine, Ian White, a Scottish historian who was here a year or two ago, I think. I can't remember exactly when it was. But he has explored another aspect of Smyth's relationship with the churches and with the abolitionists in Great Britain. In 1885, it's a kind of complicated story, but a huge number of the ministers in the Church of Scotland went out of the Church of Scotland because they insisted that the local laird, the local lord, should not be able to call a pastor of one of the Presbyterian Scottish Church of Scotland congregations. And they formed the Free Church of Scotland. And Presbyterians and others connected with Scotland thought that was this wonderful expression of independence. And Thomas Smyth was quite taken with this Free Church of Scotland, this movement. It was quite a bold movement because they went out and it meant they lost what we would today call our pensions and other kind of economic support to form the Free Church of Scotland. So in order to help support the Free Church of Scotland, people in the U.S. began to raise money for it. And in Charleston, they had a great meeting here, and $5,000 was raised and with Smyth's leadership, and was sent to Scotland. Well, the Free Church was delighted, of course, to get that money until the abolitionists discovered that the money had come from Charleston, where Charleston was the center of the importation of slaves into the U.S. up until the end of until 1808, when the international slave trade was stopped. So Charleston was identified as a kind of center of the slave power in the U.S. And so abolitionists insisted that the money be sent back. And there was this huge controversy, and painted on walls in Edinburgh and Glasgow was the slogan, "Send the money back." And Thomas Smyth was greatly involved in that. So that's another area that might be explored. One thing about Smyth was that he was a great book collector, as I know many of you know. I was talking to some of you last night about this. His collection at its peak reached about 20,000 volumes. It was either the second or third or fourth, maybe, largest private library in the country. It was larger in the 1850s than the library of the College of New Jersey, which is Princeton University today. That's the kind of library that he has. It was broad and deep in its collection and really remarkable. One interesting thing about that is that in 1858, he decided that he wanted to sell a big part of the library to Columbia Theological Seminary. And his father-in-law, James Adger, had been on the board at Columbia. His brother-in-law, John Bailey Adger, was a professor at Columbia at that time, Columbia Theological Seminary, which was then located in Columbia. It was in Columbia for 100 years before it moved to Atlanta in 1928. At any rate, they sold the library to the seminary, and the seminary, being a Presbyterian seminary, and consequently quite frugal, eventually paid the Smyth family back and they paid them back all that was owed in 1863 and 64 in Confederate money. I don't know what you can do about it, but that's the story. You could write to the seminary and complain. It's a great thing at the seminary, though. There is, I was saying this morning at breakfast, there is in the archives of the seminary a Smyth room where many of the volumes are, and there is it's set up like a 19th century pastor's study might be set up, and really it was quite a remarkable library. One of the things connected with Smyth and Columbia Seminary was in his will, when he died, he established the Smyth lectures at Columbia, and those are still going on. And each year, for over 100 years, there's been a distinguished scholar who's come and lectured at the seminary. And at some point, if you are in Atlanta when the Smyth lectures are going on, you might want to go and participate in that. My own experience is that one of the great things about being retired is that I don't have to go to them anymore because some of them can be very esoteric and boring. But some of them really have been very, very important, especially, well, not just especially, but of particular interest to me was around the time of the modernist, fundamentalist debates that were going on in this country. And one year they had a Princeton professor that represented the intellectual side of fundamentalism, and the next year they had someone who, to do the Smyth lectures, who represented the other side. I know that some of you have law connections, and I'm not quite sure about the links on this, but there is John Bailey Adger's aunt gave the money to build this big dome at the seminary, and it was called Law Hall. And her home was, those of you that know Columbia, she had a beautiful 3-story home on Arsenal Hill in Columbia, there where the federal courthouse is located now. And when Sherman came through, the home was burned. And she was found wandering in the garden, disoriented. She was elderly, and friends got her and took her, and she spent the rest of her life living in the dorm at Columbia Seminary that she had contributed in honor of her husband, who had been the longtime treasurer of the seminary. Okay, another really interesting thing that some of you would, I think, could really jump on this and explore it, and that's this ship, the James Adger. I don't know a lot about ships, but it was some ship, and it was called a mail ship. That is, it carried the mail back and forth. And I'm not sure exactly what happened. I looked it up just out of curiosity not too long ago, and discovered it had this amazing history. So I think, Henry, you may have told me last night that it was sold to Philadelphia. What I found was that in 1860, right before the Civil War, in 1861, a New York firm sold it to the federal government, and it became a ship of the U.S. Navy, and it was evidently a key ship in the Navy, and it was sent to Britain to try to intercept the Alabama, the Confederate warship that was being built there. And then, I think this is just fascinating, it was the lead ship for Admiral DuPont when they invaded, I'm a South Carolinian, when the federal troops arrived on the islands, but also when Charleston Harbor, with the Battle of Charleston, it was the ship on which Admiral DuPont, what do you call the ship that the Admiral is on?
Flagship.
Okay, all right. So, and here there were Smyths and Adgers in town, while the James Adger is out there. Anyway, those of you that like military history and the history of ships and shipping, that would be a really interesting area to explore. Those of you who like adventure might take up John Bailey Adger and his wife's experience as missionaries in Turkey. It was really the mission movement was just really starting among Protestants in the early part of the 19th century, except for Moravians who had started a little earlier. And for them to go to the mission field was a very bold thing. For one thing, most missionaries died quickly after they arrived. And the Adgers lost 3 children that died probably of malaria. And then I think a sister came out and died as well, came to visit. But their time in Turkey and under the Ottomans and their travels are really amazing. And there are letters that they sent back that were recorded in missionary journals here. So the one that I found most interesting was that they left what is today a part of Turkey and sailed to what is today Lebanon. And then they went by horseback in a caravan down across Lebanon and to Jerusalem, camping out along the way. And it was, they went down to the Dead Sea, and they had to hire some Turkish soldiers to go with them in order to protect them from bandits and so on. But it was quite an adventure, and to explore that and to see, well, what all did they see and what did they do? His work was mainly the work of translation. He was a genuine linguist, and he was translating the Bible into Armenian, and that was one of the ancient Christian churches that was located in the Ottoman Empire. This morning, I talked with those at breakfast a little bit about one of Thomas Smyth's books that I think is probably the most important of his books. It was one called The Unity of the Human Races. And it was in response to a lecture that had been delivered here by a very distinguished Swiss scientist, Louis Agassiz, who was a geologist, but in that period, the 1840s, science wasn't divided up neatly into different categories. And Agassiz had said that because Africans and Caucasians have so many differences that appear to be very deep differences, that there must have been a dual origin of the races. They could not be connected originally. Well, Smyth was greatly, of course, alarmed by this and offended by it, and so was the great pastor across the street at the Lutheran Church, John Bachman, who was a scientist. He did the designation for Audubon's animals. So Bachman wrote a book taking the scientific side of the unity of the races. But Thomas Smyth took what could be called a historical, a cultural, today anthropological angle on it and argued that the differences between whites and blacks were minor, and that the present degraded condition of Africans is recent. And he does this wonderful study. In fact, part of his library about travels of explorers in West Africa, I'm confident was for this. He bought those books to help him with this, because he talked about the great kingdoms and civilizations of West Africa and explored those. So that's another area that might be of interest to you. Here's something that I thought about a lot last night in this wonderful home where we were looking. Homes that the Adgers and the Smyths lived in. And to think about what was the nature of those houses, those buildings, and why did they select those places? What was it about it that attracted them? And on the other hand, what did it mean to live in that particular building? We've got experts here about this, but how does a building shape who you are? What is it like to grow up on Legree Street? And how does growing up there, how does living in that building shape the way you see the world? So to take another thing, just think about this building. Several of you were commenting on it coming in. What kind of vision informed the building of such a structure as this? What kind of Calvinism was behind the open windows and the clean lines of this building? And what was it like to worship here week after week? And how did that help to shape the internal life of the people who came here? Well, in the same way, how do these different wonderful homes that the Smyths and Adgers have lived in, how did that shape the history of your family? I think it's really, how does the internal life of people get shaped by where we live? How do we see the world? How is that shaped by where we live? Another thing that I really thought about last night as everyone was talking and having such a good time is the deep link between place and memory. So there's a way in which our language itself conveys that, where we say things like, such and such took place. So when we remember something, we remember it in terms of a specific place generally. So how has your memory of being connected to one of these families been shaped by place, most specifically by one of these houses that the Smyths and the Adgers and the Allens and others of you have lived in? And what kind of ongoing impact does it have? Well, something could be said about, explored about the Adgers and Smyths during the Civil War. What I have in mind here now is not so much the activity of the young men who were involved in the war, though that is interesting, but what was life like at home, and where did they go, where did they live, and how did they manage during the Civil War? So that's an important part of the story. Another very important part of the story, and that I suspect you would be quite interested and thankful about is after the Civil War, most families that had been affluent before the war were quite poor after the war. This region of the country was by far the wealthiest region in the nation, per capita, including the slave population. But after the Civil War, it became one of the poorest areas in the country. Yet, the Smyths and the Adgers somehow managed to, how shall I say it politely, to keep their money and to make more money. And so I had been reading about the Adgers and Smyths for years, and I had wondered about that. And recently on another study I was doing, I looked up a book. You can now look up anything you want on Google Book, just about, that's been published in the past, before the last 30 or 40 years. And I found this book on the Brown family and the Brown Company. And what is said in there about the Adgers is that Robert Adger had the foresight to convert their wealth, a good part of their wealth, and into British sterling, and to commit it to the care of the Brown family and company in Great Britain. And so after the Civil War, there were adequate resources, apparently, and I'm just suggesting this for some of you to explore. I actually hope to explore it myself at some point. For them to become really important leaders in the attempt to try to revitalize the economy. That was not the intent, I don't think so much, but it was that they were such good business people. So the development of the phosphate industry here was really possible because they had some money, some capital resources, and the Browns helped with that, by the way. The Browns participated in that. And then the famous work that Captain Smyth did in the upstate, developing the textile industry. Really remarkable. So how they managed that great transition that was called the Civil War. One interesting thing I'm not going to talk about, other than to mention real quickly right now, the effort that John Bailey and Adger made for the religious instruction of slaves, and the way in which, out of this church, a great church was built right down on the corner of Calhoun and Meeting Street, the Zion Presbyterian Church. I talked about this to a group here earlier, some years ago. And I've called it, when I've written about it, an experiment in paternalism, because a small group of Adgers and Smyths left Second Church, went down and joined Zion Church that was for blacks, but they had to sit in the balcony. The whites had to sit in the balcony down there. And but they controlled the church. I mean, the elders were Adgers and Smyths and a few others from here. So it was this paternalism, this vision of, we have a place in society and blacks have a place in society. Each should stay in their place, but we have a responsibility to help take care of them. It's paternalistic. In an interesting way, Captain Smyth took that paternalism and applied it in a new, rapidly changing social and cultural setting for the textile industry in the upstate. The mill villages that he built, and he was quite concerned about the health, welfare, religious life of mill workers. But it was a continuation in some different ways of that old paternalism, the old assumptions of the paternalism earlier about a coherent community was under great stress from a rising capitalism and individualism and so on of the late 19th century. But that's another area. The Smyths and Adgers had quite a conflict with the populists of their day, especially Pitchfork Ben Tillman, who was a leader of this rising populism that resented the old elites in Charleston. And while all the governors had been from the Low Country before the Civil War, it would be 1940 before a Low Country governor was elected again. So the Smyths and Adgers fought against this populism of Pitchfork Ben Tillman, and given the rise of populism today, it would be interesting. I think it's an interesting story. Finally, the Smyths and Adgers were cosmopolitan people in many ways. They traveled. After the Civil War, even. That's one thing that alerted me that something was going on, because they left almost immediately, a group of them left almost immediately for Europe, where you don't go to Europe if you don't have any money. So there was something going on there. But they were, the point I want to make is that they were cosmopolitan people. And in the 1880s, Darwinism was making its impact on American culture. And there was a great debate in the Presbyterian Church that centered around Woodrow Wilson's uncle, James Woodrow, who was a professor at Columbia Seminary and had a PhD from Heidelberg in chemistry. And I can't go into the debate except to say this, that there's a lot of interest right now in this debate by historians of science. A new book out of Johns Hopkins deals with it extensively. It was a very, very sophisticated debate, 40 years before the famous Scopes monkey trial and all that went on in Tennessee with that. The interesting thing for me is that while most Southerners were against what James Woodrow was teaching, which was that there was no essential conflict between the Christian faith and the Bible and and evolution, because they were two different spheres of study and life and so on. The Adgers and the Smyths supported James Woodrow. And I think what that points to is the degree to which they were cosmopolitan people and others. As the South became increasingly provincial, increasingly closed in, and many ways isolated from the rest of the world, at least intellectually, the Smyths and Adgers continued to have connections out, and that's important. Okay, I've actually gone longer than I intended, but it's so interesting.
Thank you so much. I can think of about 20 more questions I'd like to ask, but we'll just save that for another day. But it's wonderful for you to be here and share with us your thoughts on the Adgers and the Smyths. For those of you who are not here a lot, the Adger graveyard is right around the corner of the church, and several of those gravestones have been recently put back together by one of our family members here. The Thomas Smyth graveyard is right there, but you might find it interesting to go take a peek at those. He's not here, but if he were, I'd thank Adger Smyth, without an E, as well as Peggy Hay, for all they did to get this reunion started, and it's just wonderful to have everybody here and be able to talk about something that's of such great interest to us all. Thank you.
Thanks.